Okay, we are here talking about the book Atlas of the Heart. And again, this is by Dr. Brene Brown. I am mostly just teaching out of the book, here and there offering my own 2 cents. If you know me, I am Dr. Michelina. And we are really desperately, I think, needing to look at today's topic, which is places we go when we're hurting. Places we go when we're hurting is somewhere that we don't really want to look. We do not want to look, we do not want to feel, we do not want to experience, and yet we will, right? Places we go when we're hurting are anguish, hopelessness, despair, sadness, and grief, to name a few. And we do not like to go here. We do not want to feel these things. We would prefer anything else, quite frankly. And so one of the hard things, I think, is letting ourselves sit in these painful places, the places we go when we're hurting, because we don't know how we're going to survive it, right? Like you don't know how you're going to survive anguish. You don't know how you're going to survive hopelessness. These are somewhat crippling experiences, emotions, feelings, right? And so this may trigger, let me just start here, guys. This may trigger some of you. So just be mindful of your emotional state. Unlike a lot of the others, if you still have latent sadness, grief, hopelessness, naming those things might make you see them in you differently, right? So I want to be very delicate here to the best of my ability, not knowing what you're going through or what you've gone through, that in talking about these things that we experience, these emotions, these feelings we experience when we're hurting, it may draw some of that up. It's not a bad thing. It just means that you want to be mindful because if you go through this and you are feeling some type of way, there's probably things that are unprocessed in you that need to be looked at, right? Hurts, old hurts. Now, I will just say, everybody in this life has been hurt. I just published a Substack on this. Everybody in this life has gone through hurt, and that hurt can sometimes become anguish and hopelessness and despair and grief and sadness, right? And so, one of the most important things we can do is learn how to process our hurt, to let things hurt and have a process to outlet the hurt, to be able to say, ow, that was painful, instead of I'm fine. So the places we go when we're hurting, we actually have to allow ourselves to go there. Sometimes though, specifically with like anguish, it kind of overtakes you. If you have had an experience happen in your life that causes anguish, you really don't have a choice in the matter. It will overtake you, right? Because anguish is this unbearable, traumatic experience that includes shock, incredulity, like you're incredulous, your grief, and you're powerless. Now, grief actually comes on later in the book and in our presentation here, because I'm following the order of the book, but grief in and of itself is a mix of many emotions. So when you're feeling anguish, you are on system overload for too many things. You're shocked, you're scared, you're feeling hopeless, you're feeling powerless, you're feeling lost, you're feeling a lot of things. And because you're on kind of system overload in an anguish moment, you can and often do sort of physically, your body can give out, right? If you have an anguishing moment, a moment of anguish, I probably don't even have to explain it to you because you can remember it. You can feel it where you literally dropped to your knees. You literally went boneless. You literally couldn't process it. I have experienced anguish multiple points in my life where my body physically and literally gave out. One when I was 13 and my best friend died. one when I was in jail and I was told I was going to stay there for longer than I expected, right? My bones just went liquid. And so the anguish of the thing is very powerful in how powerless it makes us feel, right? Like in those moments I just explained of my own life, those were moments I had no power over the outcome. When my best friend died, I can't do anything but just sit in the pain of that. She's not coming back. I wasn't expecting it. When I was in jail, I can't do anything about it. I'm trapped. I'm caged. My life is in the mercy of the system. And so the powerlessness around anguish makes it that much more traumatic and unbearable because we cannot change, we cannot reverse, we cannot negotiate what has happened. We only have to endure it because that is the reality of the situation, whether we like it or not. Anguish is very, very difficult because it's so many things at once, right? And so, it is one of those things that takes over you and sort of pierces you in a way that will probably change your life. Like if you've experienced an anguish moment, right? Dr. Brene Brown talks about a phone call she received. Your life is probably irreparably changed. Like when Kristen died, my whole life changed. When I was in jail, my whole life changed. There are very distinct before and afters. Anguish is just one of those things that when you experience it, it is overwhelmingly pervasive and crippling and painful beyond measure. And you cannot do anything but let it exist, right? And so what she says, and I think it's important, I think it's very important if you have had anguish in your life, it is important. I'm sorry, it is often hard to find our way back. I'm on page 95 if you're following along, by the way. I know some people who are watching these actually went out and bought this book, which is great. I don't sell it. Okay, I just like it for my own practice. So I make no commission on anything, right? But we're on page 95. And what I'm reading here is it's often hard to find our way back into our bodies after experiencing anguish. This is why so much effective trauma work today is not only about reclaiming our breath, our feelings, and our thinkings, but also getting our bones back and returning to our bodies. If you have experienced anguish, you need to do somatic work, right? You need to do bodily release work because your tissues store your issues, right? The body does keep score. It's a great book you should read. Everybody should read it. And your fascia system locks these things in place as a protective mechanism, but also it keeps it there. So if you're not doing somatic release, if you're not focusing on your breath, focusing on your body, you're not going to get the full depth of healing, right? Because our tissues store our issues. And when you've got anguish that physically incapacitates you, you do need to come back into your body. And that can be very difficult for all of us. The people who do not do that somatic healing work come back into themselves, because that's an option. It always is. You convince yourself you're okay. You keep yourselves upright by hanging on. You can become closed off, not open to vulnerability and gifts, and barely exist because anything at that moment threatens the fragile, rigid scaffolding that holds up our crumpling selves and keeps us standing. And as someone who did that, right, the events that happened to me that were so anguish-inducing when I was 13 and 14 years old, I did not address. They came out, they always do. I didn't address them for 14 years, but my behaviors and my choices did. And so, it is really Not the best idea to suffer through and say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, when you're not fine, you're not fine, you're not fine. But again, I hope you don't need to find out the hard way. I did. Okay. It took me 14 years in a felony to figure out don't hide your hurt. Don't pretend you're okay when you're not. Don't shove things down so deep that you don't address them because they will leak out elsewhere. But again, I'm just the messenger. So anguish, very, very pervasive, very, very painful, needs to be addressed professionally, I would say. Um, Moving on to something equally difficult, because again, these are the places we go when we're hurting, is hopelessness. Because we need hope. We need to be children of hope, right? Hope is one of the most important things that keep us going. So when you get into hopelessness, and I've lived out of this, so I know you do not want to live. If you need hope to live and you function out of hopelessness that is so pervasive you can't see around it, you will not want to live anymore. You will want to die, right? Being hopeless is strongly related to being suicidal. We can't be shocked about this because we need hope. Brene Brown says we need hope like we need air. To live without hope is to risk suffocating on hopelessness and despair, risk being crushed by the belief that there's no way out of what's holding us back, no way to get to what we desperately need, right? And so people think hope, and this is her point, not mine, hope is a fuzzy emotion that's so warm and full of wonder. It's not. It's a cognitive process, right? We experience hope when we set realistic goals, we can figure out how to achieve those goals, and we have agency and we can believe in ourselves. So hope has a formula. Set goals, accomplish goals, believe you've got the ability to accomplish goals. That's when we experience hope, and we all need to have hope. It's why like coaching is one of the most important things that you do in coaching is set goals that feel like they are going to get you to where you want to go, that they're manageable. You have agency over your life when you're doing the small things. When you live out of hopelessness, and I'm going to share this from my own self, you get to a place where even the little things you don't want to do, right? When you're in hopelessness, and hopelessness again does arise out of a combination of things, negative life events, negative thought patterns, and the perceived inability to change the circumstances, right? And so we get into self-blame, we get into the fact that nothing is ever going to be okay, we get into the fact that we can't change anything. Life is full of change and growth. And so when you're in hopelessness, you have no hope of getting to where you want to get, your ability to get there. And so I experienced and do experience hopelessness as a result of my felony charge and conviction, as a result of the very difficult legal circumstances around my life. And I will tell you right now, I was suicidal 7 years ago, August 23rd, 2019. The hopelessness was so pervasive around everything that I knew it would have been easier to die and not live. And so hopelessness is both a very painful thing, and it is a very low, and I have this mood meter that I really love. It's not going to show well, but it's a mood meter, and it's low energy and low pleasantness, and despairing and hopelessness are at the bottom corner of that. Like when you live out of despair and hopelessness and despondent, low energy and low pleasantness, you are usually very physically incapacitated. If you have ever experienced extreme hopelessness, you probably can't get up. You probably can't get up. Like physically, literally cannot get up. I have heard this, I have experienced it for myself. If you are in extreme despair, hopelessness, and despondentness, you don't have the energy to stand. It's not the same as anguish, although anguish does bring you to your knees. It's like shocking. It's like a lightning strike. Hopelessness is like fog, and it's just always there, and you can't see past it. And so, it is extremely painful, and it is also extremely crippling, just in a sort of different way than anguish is. Anguish is a lightning strike, and you're down. Hopelessness is just a pervasive bleakness that you can do nothing, you are nothing, you can change nothing, you have no hope of things getting better. It will always be this bad. It will always be this awful. There's nothing you can do. There's no way out. You're trapped. It is awful. And if you have ever experienced it, I am so sorry for you, because I will tell you what, living through hopelessness was and is and continues to be one of the hardest things I have ever done. And I do not wish it on anybody. And so I know when people say, like, I don't understand how people can ever kill themselves, I'm glad you don't understand that, because it means you've never been to the depth of hopelessness that someone who has committed suicide has been in. And as someone who has struggled with suicide my whole life, but really was making the plans to do it, no one's ever going to come to me and say, like, oh, I'm thinking about committing suicide, and me say, I don't understand, because I do. I greatly do. I so greatly do. And so hopelessness is really one of those things where you cannot see out of your current circumstances, and you can't see the way you can show up productively, and you just really don't have the strength to stand. It's really that you don't have you don't have you don't have agency. And agency is something I think that we all need. I will tell you, if you have never read Man's Search for Meaning and you struggle with hopelessness, you should go read it. Man's Search for Meaning by Dr. Viktor Frankl is about his experience in the Holocaust. And meaning is one of those things that gives us hope. When things are meaningless, we feel like things are hopeless. There's no point to this, right? So if you have never read, and I'm a huge fan of, well, Dr. Frankl's work, I'm a huge fan of. Logotherapy, I'm a huge fan of. But like bibliotherapy, I'm also a huge fan of. Reading books to help you come outside of yourself is so important, I think. And so, so much, if you guys want to know the truth about how I have dealt with my own hopelessness through my whole life, not just from my felony charge 7 years ago, but from my whole life, because I've always battled deep, deep feelings of despair and hopelessness. Um, books, books, books are it. So I will always recommend books to you, right? Part of the reason why I went into high school English teaching is because books helped to save my life, and high school was so bad for me. I wanted to help other people. Now, admittedly, I made a terrible choice that has ruined my whole life, but like, even still, everybody needs hope. And so if you can get that from a book, go read Dr. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, because it's very, very good. And so hopelessness can go two ways. It can be a specific situation, right? Like you're feeling hopeless about your marriage, finishing school, a job. It's more sort of momentary and seasonal. Might be time to cut that thing off. Or you can apply it to life more generally, right? Like for me, I was hopeless back in 2019 because everywhere I looked was a dead end and no easy fixes. So it wasn't just like this or that, it was all of it, right? Um, and so the work that I had to do to move out of that was a whole cognitive rewiring, a whole life reset, a whole everything had to change because there was nothing left of that life, that girl. So like August 23rd, 2019, that was 7 years ago, that whole operating system to some degree had to get upgraded, or I wouldn't have survived it. And I did, I did. That was it's been a lot of 7 year work, profound, personal, professional development work. And it's not like I'm not still me. I'm still here, right? But I'm not the way I operated then and the way I operate now are two very different things. And they had to be. They had to be. So once we move, and again, I am sorry if you're feeling some kind of way, if you're feeling heaviness in your chest, maybe take a break. I know this is heavy. I know this is hard. Okay. I know. I know. Not just like I know, I live it. I get it. Okay, I do. I do. I do. So if you need a minute, take some breaths. If you are struggling with anguish or hopelessness, if you have loved ones that are, um, you know, it is important to acknowledge and to talk to someone. Okay. And they have hotlines too. Okay. Suicide hotline. They have free resources in places. So do yourself the service of acknowledging it and letting the fear or concern or hopelessness out. Okay. But if you're okay, we'll go on the next slide because it doesn't get easier, guys. Okay. We're gonna go to despair. Okay. Now despair. I know we go from like bad to worse. Okay. I do know. Okay. I do. I know this because I've lived it. I'm not laughing. It's awful. Okay. I have lived it. And when we're hurting, when we're in despair, and again, I have lived out of despair. It's crippling. Okay. It's a sense of hopelessness about a person's entire life and their future, right? The hopelessness you've been feeling seeps into literally everything, everywhere. There's no way out, plus extreme sadness, you will be in despair. And when I was in the depth of my despair, um, like I didn't want to, like I couldn't get ready for the day. I couldn't show up. Um, I couldn't like brush my teeth at night when like I couldn't get myself to shower. Like all executive functions stopped. I wasn't feeding myself, couldn't make money, couldn't talk to anybody. Despair is a danger zone. And the only thing that got me out of despair, and listen, I am telling you this as someone who's been a Christian her whole life, as someone who loves the Lord, as someone who is a minister for the Lord. I love the Lord, but even still, it's not a faith issue. One of my favorite neurosurgeons talks about this, where like your extreme depression is not a faith issue, it's a brain wiring issue, right? Like your brain rewires itself. It's got neuroplasticity, okay? And so it's not it's not a faith issue to be in despair. It is a lot of times a sort of unfulfilled, state of like life. Like you're failing at life. Like you can't do anything. Your entire life, your future, everything is awful and it's not going to get better. And the way that um and again, this is a theologian she's quoting here. She is saying, I once heard theologian Rob Bell define despair as the belief that tomorrow will be just like today. When we are in struggle and or experiencing the pain of despair, that belief that there's no end to what we're experiencing is a desperate and claustrophobic feeling. We can't figure a way out of or through the struggle and the suffering. And as someone, listen to me, okay? When you are serving a life sentence for sending a picture, I promise you, despair is real. Everywhere you look, there's hopelessness. Everywhere you look, there is no way out. Everywhere you look, there is just horror, hopelessness. It is not even pain, it's more than pain, right? And so, despair is one of those things that seeps. It's like ooze. The longer you're in hopelessness, the more likely you will be in despair. And so you want to just be mindful because pain and struggle are a part of the growth process. I know we don't like that. I know we kind of just hate that, really. But there's a reason why it's called growing pains. There is a pain associated with growth. There is pain associated with new things, labor pains, the pain of practice. But when you have so much pain and sadness that it's becoming hopeless, and then you have so much hopelessness, it's becoming despair, you are in a very dangerous place. And for me, the only thing that got me out of that was medication. Truly. I had not taken medication for any of my emotional, mental, behavioral health issues for 30 years. And the only thing that got me out of despair was medication and a clinical diagnosis. And so I will never say that if you've been in extreme hopelessness and or despair, do whatever it takes to get out of that place. And I will say that, like, sometimes the deeper the despair, the longer it's gone on, the more pervasive it is, the more drastic the measures to try to get yourself out of it, right? Because, like, at one point in my own hopelessness, talking was enough. But after 7 years with life to go, talking wasn't enough anymore, right? So there is something to, like, kind of stages of despair, because if you are experiencing what they call the 3 Ps here, personalization, permanence, and pervasiveness, they might not all line up, right? So personalization is I am the problem. Now, to some degree, you are the problem, okay? Anything that happens in your life, a lot of the times, you are a main character of. You may or may not truly be the problem. Like in my own case, I was the problem. It was me, right? Like I made the bad decision. That's harder to live with, I promise you, than like your spouse cheated on you. You might feel like you're the problem there, but you're not. You might feel like it though, and I'm not discounting or discrediting that. But you weren't. They did the thing, right? So we sometimes unfairly personalize the thing. And then sometimes, like in my case, when you're personalizing, it's just accountability. So you have a belief you're the problem. Now, that should lead, if you really are the problem, like in my case, it was me, it should lead to a sense of agency, like, well, if I'm the problem, I can fix it. I can do the work. And like part of my own despair was I had been doing the work and it's not enough. It's never enough. There will never be a time that it's enough. That's where some of that despair comes in, right? Like it doesn't matter how hard you try. Like this was my mindset. It was all for nothing anyway. And so there's different levels of these things. And I've experienced a lot of them. So I do really get it. So that personalization were the problem. And couple that with the permanence of this is never going to end. Not only am I the problem, I can't fix it and it's going to be for forever. Now, again, in my case, that's literally true. A life sentence is permanent. It's a life sentence, right? And so in the case of most people, that is maybe not necessarily true. Sometimes it is though, right? Like if you lose a child, you have lost the child for your life. It is forever going to be a permanent thing. But the struggle of the acute grief of it may or may not be a permanent thing, you know? There's no necessarily like there's not necessarily a timeline to any emotions that we feel. But the thinking around it, is it permanent or isn't it, is part of where we do or don't go into despair. Now, if you are someone that has not done any like cognitive development work, you might erroneously think this thing is never going to end, but actually there is an end in sight. So that's why sometimes our own thoughts and feelings kind of come into hopelessness and despair. And why sometimes if you just shift your thinking, it can lift out of it. But sometimes it cannot, right? So like in my case, and I'm not saying I have the best case, I'm just giving you my experience here. There is truth to both. I am the problem. I was the problem. 7 years ago, I was the problem. I'm not now, but nobody cares. It doesn't freaking matter, right? So there's one. Two, the permanence of the thing, it really will never end. There's no end in sight. So that, both of those things played into my own sense of despair. And then the pervasiveness of the thing. There's nothing good, right? There's nothing good left. When we're struggling, we fall into the trap of believing that whatever we're up against has stained or changed every single thing in our life, right? And so we feel like this thing that we've been a part of has changed everything, it's stained everything. Now, in a lot of times, the cases, that's not really true. Once again, in my case, it is literally true. Part of the despair that I have felt is because these things, personalization, permanence, and pervasiveness, are legitimately true. There's evidence of it. 7 years later, my felony offense still stains everything. I can't pass background check. I can't get good housing. I can't get married. I can't have kids. Like it stains everything. So it's not like in my head, it's in my reality. This is literally the case. That's not true for everybody, even though it feels true, right? And again, I'm not saying, oh, my situation's worth despairing over. I am saying, having lived out a situation that is literally full of death and despair, I can tell you the truth of what is going on here. Okay, I can testify to it. And like I said, it's all in varying degrees because everybody has different things that are hopeless or despairing to them. And so whether it's true in reality or not, if you think it and you feel it, it makes it true for you, right? In my case, it's actually true. And so living out of despair is still not a place we want to be, even when there's the actual situation literally calls for it. We never want to live there. And this is, one of the most important things to remember. If you're here for a reason, you're here for a season, you have a purpose. your life matters, right? And as someone who has been shoved in such a box that it's the circumstances say, like, you should have killed yourself 7 years ago, I will always advocate for the fact that if you're here, you have a purpose. Um, because I know in the last 7 years, even though I have wanted to end my life most of the time, you can still do good for other people and for yourself if you will move past the despair and the hopelessness and the anguish of whatever you're going through. Right? And so I get the places we go when we're hurting, but there's still life around it, even when you can't see it. And so, and then you do have to fight for it. You really do have to fight for it. And people will throw things back at you. You know, they will, even when you climb up out of that pit, they'll chuck you right back in it. Right? And so despair is one of those things um, that do whatever you can to get out of it, quite frankly. But a lot of times we don't always even recognize that we're in it. And so when one of the things that we can do, right? And like I said, so much of my coaching, identity, character work is around this because like the truth of who you are. You are not what happened to you. You are not the labels you have. You're a living soul before the Lord, quite frankly. Um, and it's so important to be reminded of that. And the world will not remind you. It will not remind you. And so one of the things that you can kind of do to try to pull yourself out of it is when you're despairing, think outside of the moment or the experience. What I'm upset about, is it going to matter in 5 minutes? Is it going to matter in 5 hours, 5 days, 5 months, 5 years, right? Now, for many people, that is a very good help. In my own case, it only a little bit would add to the despair, right? Which is, yeah, it's still going to be a freaking issue. It's an issue for the rest of my life, right? So there's other means of fortitude and character strength and resilience that may need to be employed, quite frankly. But trying to remember there's life around this for most people, many people, is a very helpful thing. In my case, but again, I'm the exception, not the rule. I'm presenting to you, so I will give you the depths of my despair. Because if I can help anybody, I will use anything I've ever gone through to help someone. So you're not alone if you have felt any of this. Okay, I get it. You're not alone. But also get out of it. If this helps, then I've done something good with my life, quite frankly. And so, again, if you're triggered here and you're feeling some type of way here, because it is heavy, and I know, maybe take a beat, take a second. If you are someone who believes in the Lord, go talk to him, say a prayer. If you are somebody who has good connections in your life, go connect. And if you are somebody who's in such deep despair and you have none of that, use the resources available. Call the suicide hotline. Go talk to someone. Go connect. It's like one of the most important things you can do. Now, again, as someone who has clinical diagnoses that make it very hard to connect with people, medication was the answer. Okay, so do what you can to get what you need with the resources available to you. I promise you, you are worth it. Nobody should live in despair. Nobody should live in despair. Nobody should live there. And as somebody who has and does live there, I will die on that hill. I will die on that hill. And so, if you're not okay, take a beat. and let yourself not be okay and connect somewhere. But if you want to keep going, then let us talk about sadness and grief, right? So sadness is normal. Okay. Sadness is important to life. Like to be human is to be sad, just like it is to be happy. Be happy, be sad, be mad, like there are just fundamental things that we feel. I get my feelings binder that are normal to humanity, right? Surprise, disgust, fearful, sadness, happy, anger. Those are core, essential human things that we all feel. They branch out. And I highly suggest if you don't have a feelings wheel, you should get one. Okay. I love a feelings wheel. I think they're very important. I track my feelings all the time just so that I'm in touch with them and aware of keying into what I'm going through. Um, but sadness is part of life. You will feel sad. And feeling sad, feeling down because of something episodic is very, very normal. Again, her point's not mine. Sadness is not depression. Sadness is not grief. Those are different things. Those are states of being. Like you've now made it pervasive. Again, that pervasiveness exists. It's everywhere you look. If you're sad in everywhere you look, you're getting into depression, right? And again, as someone who is clinically diagnosed, I get it. But sadness in life is something that can bring us to more humanity, bring us to closer fellowship, right? Like this, I like what she says here, so I'm gonna read it, quote it. Owning our sadness is courageous and a necessary step to finding our way back to ourselves and each other, right? Own the things you're sad about, let it hurt, and you can really connect more deeply and be vulnerable. One of the things I had to do and started doing back in 2018 when I was just so many emotions, was stopping saying I'm fine when I wasn't. And again, that was therapy. And it is kind of courageous to be like, hey, I'm not okay right now. I'm really hurt right now. It's really upset me. That opens the door for a lot of really beautiful conversation, right? And she talks about like movies that she posted. So she posted the question of like, what is your favorite sad movie? And they're really great. Life is Beautiful, Terms of Endearment, Beaches, The Joy Luck Club, The Color Purple, Steel Magnolias, Brokeback Mountain, P.S. I Love You, Inside Out, Up, every movie ever made where a dog dies, right? Like it's like Where the Red Fern Grows, Old Yeller, like Bridge to Terabithia, like they're sad. The movie is sad. And so it should elicit sadness. That is normal. If you are sad at a sad event, that is normal behavior. That's what you should be doing. To be a sociopath is to be apathetic to a sad event. And we're not judging people who struggle with psychopathy or sociopath behaviors. Like we're not. Because again, everybody's got their stuff. But when you see something sad and you feel sad, you should be giving yourself a gold star. That's normal stuff. That makes sense, right? And so I'll never forget my therapist in 2018. She's like, Michelina, how are you today? And I'm like, I'm fine. And she was like, you are not fine. I read about you on the news this morning. You are not fine. Do not lie to me. Do not lie to yourself. And I said, I don't know what to tell you, Monique. I am fine. And then she handed me a nice little face of feelings. I have that too. Feelings faces, which I had never seen before. And it's an emotions vocabulary chart, right? And you look at the faces and you're like, oh, I'm angry, I'm confused, I'm embarrassed, I'm enraged, I'm ashamed, I'm depressed. Right now you've got language for all the things that you're feeling. But if you are someone who's been emotionally repressing for your whole life, well, don't be shocked when you don't have language because you don't even know what you're feeling because you don't even pay attention to it. Again, feelings are not facts. We do not want them to lead our life, but we do want to key into them in the same way we key into check engine lights on our car. they're important. This is why I'm teaching this book. It's important to our emotional maturity, to our growth, to our personal development. It is important to know your emotions because then you're aware of what's a normal emotion, sad response to a sad thing, what's an abnormal thing we need help, despairing, pervasive all the time, right? Like you want to know these things about yourself. Or if you don't want to know these things about yourself, like fine, but it benefits us to know how we operate as humans, right? So sadness is important, but we don't want to live there, right? And so sadness and depression, not the same thing, because depression is a cluster of symptoms that persist over time. Sadness and grief. Grief is a whole group of emotions and experiences, which we'll talk about, right? So sadness can even sometimes have like positive aspects to them. And we just talked about that with places we go when things kind of don't necessarily make sense, when things aren't what they seem. Bittersweetness, that's sad and appreciative. So sadness doesn't necessarily only have hurtful things to it, right? And a lot of the time, there's a study actually that she's quoting that there's a highly significant positive correlation between sadness and enjoyment, right? Sometimes you can really enjoy something even when it's sad, right? Um, but a lot of times we sort of fear sadness so much we don't want to let ourselves experience it. But to be sad is to be human. That's also why I say, like, oh, I just want to be happy is a terrible goal for your life. Because happiness is feeling up because of a moment, event, occurrence, story thing, right? Like happy and sad are emotions that are normal, but they're not life states because in the same way you don't want to be depressed, you also don't want to be manic. Like that's bipolar, you know? And that's, again, we're not judging bipolar disorder because everybody's got their stuff. But living in those states is actually not a great goal, right? Same with grief. All right. Grief is a process. Grieving is a process. It's a process, and we are very bad at it. It includes multiple emotions. And what she found in her research is there are fundamental elements of grief. Loss is one of them, longing is another, and feeling lost is the third, right? So the loss has to do not just with death and separation, but certainly that, but also a loss of normality, loss of what could be, loss of what we thought we knew or understood, right? That loss is more than just a physical, tangible loss. It can be a perceived loss, right? The loss of what we knew or understood about something or someone can happen in infidelity, betrayal trauma. I thought they would never do this, but then they did. Right? So we have grief when we feel loss, when we have longing, right? It's this involuntary yearning. We want it for wholeness, understanding, meaning, right? Like it's perfectly normal to want things to go back to the way they were, even when they can't, right? Like in my ministry work, I talk about it like going back to Egypt. The Lord might remove you from Egypt, but you're in the wilderness still wanting to go back to Egypt because you don't know what's ahead. So it's very normal for us to kind of look back and be like, oh, I want that back. It's the nostalgia we just talked about, right? If you're following along. So it's very human to feel these things. But also, loss plus longing plus feeling lost equals grief, very complicated. And that feeling lost grief requires us to reorient every part of our physical, emotional, and social worlds. And when we imagine the need to do this, most of us picture the painful struggle trying to adjust to tangible change. Examples, moving away, dying, loss of something, right? And so the thing that's really tough about grief is that it's a process, and it's a long process for some people, and the world very quickly wants us to move, right? And I just actually wrote a Substack about this, where talking about grief in a world that wants us to get over it is very difficult. Because it's like, what do you mean you're still upset about something that happened 15 years ago? And it's like, well, I'm still upset about it. I haven't had a chance to integrate it. What do you mean? Which we'll talk about acute grief, integrated grief, complicated grief, and disenfranchised grief. Because sometimes disruptions to the grieving process makes it go on for longer. And again, that is actually the Center for Complicated Grief statistics, not mine. And so, none of this is mine, quite frankly, except for my experiences and my like theological insights. Most of this is me teaching out of the book, right? And deferring to her research because it is just so very good. And I think so critical for us to understand. So, something I think is important that they highlight that I want to share with you if you are going through any grief. When a person adapts to the loss, the grief is not over, right? Just because you're figuring out how to move through the loss of the thing doesn't mean you're not still grieving the loss of the thing, right? Like, and sometimes if you have a lot of pervasive loss, that grief goes on a lot longer, right? Like, as an example, when I lost everything, and I do mean everything, right? My freedom, my reputation, my career, my good standing in the community, my ability to pass a background check, my money, where I lived, all the people that ever liked me. When I lost everything, I still had to figure out how to cope with that. I mean, at first, the way I was going to do that was suicide, but once that didn't happen, I had to figure out how to cope with this loss, this pervasive loss everywhere. But there are still things I grieve now. There are things I couldn't even look at for years, right? Like just because you kind of figure out how to navigate the reality doesn't mean you've actually gone through the grieving process, especially when there's like a deep, deep, deep loss, right? And so just because someone has found the strength to get back through their day after they have lost something doesn't mean that the grief of it is over. And I actually was just having a coaching call on this yesterday where there were things that were brought up from 13 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, that there's still grief around for people. And it's like, yeah, because grief is a process. And if we've never given full time and space to that healing and that grief around that thing, we just had to kind of bundle it down and move on, survive. The grief is still very present. Like I said, our tissue store issues. Somatic work is important. And so the grief process is one, very complicated, and two, can be long if, and especially when it keeps getting interrupted by the life you have to live. But if you get into the place of integrating your grief, it doesn't mean it's never going to make you sad. It just means you're figuring out how to hold two very complex things. I wish this wasn't the case, but it is. And I'm sad. But I know I'm going on. And that's a process. That is a process. And so what I think is so important is this breakdown that they do for the Center for Complicated Grief. I really love it. It's very, very good. And it talks about acute grief, integrated grief, complicated grief, and disenfranchised grief. Now, I have lived all of these, okay? So let me just tell you that complicated grief, when you're working through it, requires a mental health professional with training in complicated grief work. It does. Like a lot of this grief work requires a professional. So, acute grief is what happens in the initial period after the loss. So, it very often has strong feelings of yearning, longing, sadness, with also anxiety, bitterness, anger, remorse, guilt, and or shame. Thoughts are mostly focused on the person who died, who left, the thing that was gone, and it can be difficult to concentrate on anything else. Acute grief dominates a person's life, right? It's very, when the thing is new, it's very pervasive. It's like all you can think about. You can't get away from it. It's everywhere. When somebody dies, whether you're expecting it or not, it's still traumatic. It's harder when it's fresh a lot of the times. That acute grief, that word acute is like sharp, you know. And it is. It's a little bit like going to the anguish. It's like a lightning strike. It's acute. It's pervasive. It's there. And so it's very difficult to think around that, to feel around that, anything but these very heavy emotions. Now, acute grief, that very painful thing that we feel, acute grief, if you do not have time and space to work through it, can very easily become complicated grief. Because complicated grief occurs when something interferes with the adaptation, right? It occurs when you cannot integrate the grief because something keeps interfering with it. And so if you're trying to grieve and life keeps getting in the way, life keeps lifing, what can happen is acute grief can persist for very long periods of time. And so this is why a lot of times if people don't deal with the acute grief in the moment, 10, 20, 30 years later, they can still be feeling the effects of the acute grief. Like they can still cry when they're talking about the experience. And I've seen it and I've lived it. It can still be extremely acute, even if it's 5, 10, 15 years later, because the complicated grief did not have time to integrate. And so a person with complicated grief can feel very intense emotional pain, right? And it'll affect a lot of their life. They can't stop feeling what they're feeling. They don't see a path forward. The future without their loved one feels dismal and appealing. Relationships flounder. Life seems purposeless, as if nothing matters, right? When you're in complicated grief, it is complicated. That acute grief to that one thing has now become everything because you haven't had time to integrate and you haven't had time to figure out. Well, integration is the result of adapting to the loss. So when you integrate, you've adapted. It's not that the grief is necessarily over. It's just that the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors around the loss are integrated in ways that help the allowance, the honoring, the remembering of the loss. And so it just becomes part of your new normal. It's not normal. It's not where you were, but it's part of the normal. But if you do not have space with the acute grief to find sort of time and the ability to honor and integrate the grief, and that pattern, that moment, that thing keeps getting interrupted, complicated grief can occur. Complicated grief, again, is that grief that needs a mental health professional. And again, they're all different stages around processing the grief or the loss or the longing. And there's no right time length to it. The one I think is so important to know about is what's called disenfranchised grief. Okay. This is so important because it's grief that's not openly acknowledged or publicly supported through mourning practices because the experience is not valued or counted by others as a loss, or the grief can be invisible or hard to see by others, right? So what ends up happening is if other people don't kind of agree that there's grief around that, they kind of treat it like it doesn't matter, even though you're broken up over it, right? So examples of disenfranchised grief can include loss of a partner or parent due to divorce, loss of an unborn child or infertility, multitude of losses experienced by a survival of sexual assault, loss of a loved one to suicide. And so what ends up happening a lot of times is, as an example of disenfranchised grief, those who have come through a sexual assault, they suffer from numerous losses, but people don't see it. They don't know it. And so you can have lost something, and if people think like you're better off without it, they're not going to honor your grieving process. And so what happens is you can have some losses that include a loss of your worldview, a loss of trust, loss of self-identity, loss of self-esteem, loss of freedom and independence, loss of sense of safety and security, and or a loss of sexual interest, right? And like I will just say, the disenfranchised grief that I have had and will continue probably to work through because of the nature around my own losses is substantial. Nobody cares that I'm upset that I lost my freedom and am a felon. Nobody cares that I'm upset about my own self-worth and identity because I'm on a sex offense registry. Nobody cares. Nobody cares, quite frankly. And in fact, like I said and have said before, there are people who, when they hear the story, are like, you should have killed yourself. They completely discredit any of the work over one mistake, right? And so the disenfranchised grief is so real and very important to be aware of because sometimes you have to honor your grief, emotions, feelings enough that it doesn't matter, who's making space for it. But again, the disenfranchised grief is a tricky one because, like, let's say you got divorced 10 years ago and you know it was the right thing, but that was still a life that you had cultivated with somebody. And that's the loss of your worldview that you thought you were going to have. And like, there's a lot of loss around that. And yeah, that hurts, right? And so grief is all of us. We all have grief. We all have things we have lost. We all have things that we long for. We all have moments we feel lost. Couple them all together, it can be any of these stages of grief, and it is very complicated. And one of the big reasons why this, I think, book is so important and this awareness is so important is because your feelings matter, your emotions matter, you matter. And even if the world doesn't think you matter, even if the world doesn't make space for it, it still is important. Why? Because you're a human being, you're a living soul, right? And so you're more than just your emotions. You're more than just your bad decisions. You're more than just the labels. You're more than the good things you've done. You're more than your roles. You're so much more than that. You are a living soul, wholly embodied, or the goal is to be wholly embodied. And so taking space for that is important whether the world gives it to you or not, quite frankly. Now, part of why I value the work I do is because I will always be an advocate for anybody because you're a living soul, right? And part of the reason why a lot of people do come to me is because they know I'm not going to judge them. How could I? And why would I? Right? And so these places we go when we're hurting are heavy places and not easy. There is a heavy cost to being human, right? And so I do think it's so important that we know these things about ourselves, that we can discuss it, that we can be aware of it, even though it's hard. Because What's the point of a many-membered body if you can't like be in the hard things with people, right? And like one of my favorite things to do with people is to be in the pit with them. The pit, the void, I live there. I get it. I get it. And so it's not scary to me. Your stuff is not scary to me. You want to find people like that. Professionals, sure, but also people in your life that can handle your hard stuff and advise you well, or just sit in it with you. So the places we go when we're hurting, very, very important. Better if you're aware of it and you realize it and you give yourself the space to hurt and you get the resources to help you with it, right? So all that to say, we're moving on through Atlas. I hope you're enjoying it. We will talk in the next lecture about the places that we go with other people. So, and again, you can buy this book anywhere. I think it's so great. So I will see you if you come on our next lecture. I will see you there.